Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. The brass band blared as the homecoming parade snaked through Main Street, confetti swirling like a snowstorm of hope. My father, Captain Mark Reynolds, stood in the back of the green Jeep, medals glinting in the sun. His smile was calm, the kind of calm only soldiers understand, the stillness forged in chaos. The crowd cheered, flags waved, but my eyes weren't on him. They were on my mother. Linda Reynolds' lips were painted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She clapped and waved, her pearls catching the light. But for a single heartbeat, just a single beat, I saw it. A flicker in her gaze. A crack in the perfect picture she painted. My little sister, Lily, clutched the microphone, her voice floating like a prayer over the square. "He'll never know," she sang in a trembling, honey-sweet voice. The song was supposed to be a tribute, a melody for Dad's sacrifice. But each note felt like a secret spoken aloud. I leaned forward, every muscle in my body tensing. My gut twisted, an instinct screaming louder than the band. As Lily's final note soared, I caught it, Mom's hand, slipping into her purse, her phone glowing to life. She froze, eyes darting like a cornered animal, and for a moment, I swear the whole parade blurred around me. The phone screen flashed a name I didn't recognize. Ben. Call me when he's back in uniform. My breath caught. My father's oldest friend. The man he called a brother. The music faded. The cheers blurred. And as Dad saluted the crowd, I realized this parade wasn't just a welcome home. It was a mask. A pageant for a soldier. A funeral for a family. Before we move ahead, I just want to say, your support truly means everything. We're building something special here, and our next big goal is reaching 10,000 incredible subscribers. If you're feeling the emotions in these stories, imagine what's still to come. Subscribe now, be part of this amazing journey, and let's keep growing together. Your one click can make a real difference. Let's continue the story. The parade dissolved into handshakes and hugs, into the smell of hot dogs and cotton candy. Dad's laughter echoed through the square, as warm as summer sunlight. But I couldn't hear it. All I heard was the quiet beep of that phone, the glow of a message that wouldn't let me breathe. I watched Mom's fingers tighten around the purse strap. She looked at me and flinched. "You're quiet, sweetheart," she said, her voice sweet and low. But her eyes, they were pleading, warning. "It's just a friend, you know. Just an old friend." I swallowed the lie like poison. My mouth was dry, words heavy as lead. "Ben," I said, the name like a gunshot. Her face turned to glass, perfect, cold, and cracking. "Not now," she hissed under her breath, her nails digging into my wrist. "Don't you dare ruin this day." Her smile returned, brittle and bright, as Dad stepped closer, oblivious. "Everything okay here?" he asked, that steady, soldier's calm in his voice. "Perfect," Mom said. "Just perfect." But her hand trembled when she brushed his arm. I looked at Lily, too young to see the rot behind the smiles. She was beaming, eyes sparkling, her little voice still echoing in my head. "He'll never know," she'd sung. But I knew. I wanted to tell Dad, to rip the mask from her face. But the parade had become a funeral for the truth, and I was the only mourner. The confetti still fluttered in the air, bright and mocking. And as Mom kissed Dad's cheek, soft and false, I made a silent vow. She may have fooled him, but I'd make sure he'd know everything. And I wouldn't let her smile hide the grave she dug in our family. That night, the world felt too still. The echoes of the parade's applause were replaced by the hush of the living room, the soft click of the clock, the creak of the floorboards beneath my restless pacing. Dad was upstairs, medals and memories laid out like holy relics. And Mom, she was in the kitchen, humming as if nothing had happened. I couldn't stand it anymore. My chest was a vice. My pulse drummed in my ears. I waited until the house held its breath, then I stepped into the kitchen doorway. "Who's been?" I asked, voice low, each word a hammer. She jumped, the knife in her hand clattering against the cutting board. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice brittle as glass. "He's just, don't lie to me." My hands curled into fists. The memory of the message burned behind my eyes. Who is he? For a second, the mask cracked. Tears welled up, but they weren't for me. It was nothing. A mistake. You wouldn't understand. I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear she tried to hide. He's Dad's friend. His brother in arms. How long? My voice trembled, but I wouldn't let it break. Her lips quivered. Years, she whispered. The word was a blade. I never meant for it to last. I thought when he came home, it would end. But it hadn't. And as I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, I realized she wasn't just my mother anymore. She was the stranger who'd stolen my father's world. In the hush that followed, I heard Lily's song playing in my head again, each note a question, each chord a demand. He'll never know, she'd sung. I promised myself right then, he would. And nothing would stop me from tearing down her perfect lie. The next day dawned heavy, the weight of secrets hanging in the air like storm clouds. The house was full of bright light and forced smiles, Mom stirring oatmeal in the kitchen, Dad polishing his medals in the living room, and Lily humming her song as she sat cross-legged on the floor. But beneath the shine, I could feel the fracture lines in every word and gesture. Mom's eyes flickered toward me whenever she thought no one was watching, pleading, warning, a silent war in every glance. "Eat up, Lily," she said in a voice too cheerful to be real. "You want to grow strong like your father, don't you?" Lily giggled and nodded, spoon clinking against her bowl. She was too young to see the truth that buzzed in the air, but her song from the parade still haunted me. He'll never know. Each time she sang those words, it was like she was taunting fate, like the music itself was in on the secret. I watched Dad as he turned each medal over in his hands, his brow furrowed in thought. "These are more than brass," he murmured. "They're memories. Blood. My brothers who didn't come home." His voice trailed off, a faraway look in his eyes. I swallowed hard, the irony of his words slicing through me. If only he knew the brother who'd betrayed him still lived in his world, closer than any grave. "Dad," I said hesitantly, my voice trembling despite my resolve. Do you trust everyone who served beside you?" He looked up at me, his eyes clear and unwavering. "Of course," he said. "When you're out there, trust is life. It's the only thing that matters." Mom's spoon paused in the pot, her face tight with unspoken fear. I watched the lie flicker behind her smile, and in that moment, I vowed to keep pushing, to keep peeling back the layers she'd wrapped around her betrayal. The song played in my head again, Lily's voice, bright and innocent, oblivious to the storm brewing in our home. And I knew the truth was no longer just a secret to uncover. It was a mission, a battlefield, and I would not fail. That evening, I found Dad in the den, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on his face. He sat hunched over a photo album, each worn page a testament to the life he'd built, a life I feared was nothing more than a beautiful illusion. "Son," he said softly as I hovered in the doorway. "Come sit." His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it, the echo of battlefields and brothers lost. I sat beside him, the scent of old paper and aftershave wrapping around us like a memory. He turned a page, his finger tracing a photograph of him and Ben in desert fatigues, their faces covered in grit and sweat, but grinning wide. "Ben saved my life more than once," he said, his eyes distant. "We bled together, laughed together. War forges a bond no one can break." His voice cracked, a rawness slipping through. I swallowed hard. My tongue felt like it was made of lead. "Dad," I whispered, what if someone you trusted hurt you? What if that bond wasn't as strong as you thought?" He looked at me then, really looked, his blue eyes sharp, searching. "Son," he said carefully, "trust is built on truth. If the truth shatters it, it was never real." He paused, sighing. "But why are you asking me this?" His brow furrowed, concern bleeding through the cracks in his calm. My mouth opened, the confession clawing at my throat. But the words died in the dark. I couldn't destroy him with half-truths. Not yet. I'm just thinking, I said finally, my voice barely a breath. He nodded, his eyes softening as he closed the album. You're a good son, he said, laying a hand on my shoulder. Whatever's weighing on you, just know, I trust you. As he rose to leave, I watched him. This man of iron and honor, so sure of the world he'd fought to protect. My gut twisted. My father's eyes saw everything except the betrayal that lived right beside him. And in that moment, I knew I would make him see. That night, the house was quiet, each room steeped in an uneasy calm. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone illuminating the single message that had changed everything. Ben, call me when he's back in uniform. Those words pulsed in my mind like a wound. I read them over and over, each syllable a blade carving out the hollow in my chest. I needed to know how deep it went, how far Mom had gone to bury the truth. In the darkness, I rose and padded softly to her room. Her door was slightly ajar, the soft glow of her bedside lamp spilling into the hall. I pushed it open just enough to see her, sitting at her vanity, fingers pressed to her temples. Her phone lay beside her, screen dark, but I knew what it held. Her secrets, her shame. I stepped forward, heart thudding. She didn't hear me at first, lost in thought. Why? I demanded, my voice a whisper but sharp as steel. She jumped, spinning around, her face pale and stricken. It was a mistake, she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I couldn't stop. He understood me. He was there when your father was gone, and what about him? I spat, anger bubbling over. He trusted you. He trusted Ben. How could you do this to him? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was lonely, she sobbed. You think you know everything, but you don't. I tried to end it. God knows I tried. But he kept coming back. I stared at her, at the woman who had been my mother and my betrayer all at once. You lied to all of us, I said, my voice low and final. And I'm going to make sure he knows. Every word, every secret. She choked back a sob, reaching for me. But I stepped away, the weight of the message still burning in my palm. The truth was a fire, and I would not let it be buried. The next morning, the house felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting everything in gold, but I could see the cracks in the performance. Mom moved like a ghost, her face a mask of forced calm as she poured coffee into Dad's favorite mug. Morning, honey, she said softly, her voice bright and brittle. Dad didn't notice the tremor in her hands as he sipped his coffee, his eyes soft with trust. The parade was perfect, he said, smiling at her. I couldn't have asked for more. Mom's lips twitched, trying to hold on to that smile. Of course, she said. You deserve it all. I stood at the kitchen counter, my stomach churning. The lie was there in every word she spoke, a film of sweetness covering the rot beneath. I watched her closely, memorizing every flicker of her eyes, every tight breath. Dad set down his cup and reached for her hand. You've always been my anchor, he said, his voice thick with affection. Even when I was oceans away, I always knew you'd be here, waiting. She flinched at that word, waiting, and for the first time, the mask slipped. Her eyes glistened with tears she didn't dare let fall. I tried, she whispered, her voice so low I almost missed it. Dad frowned, confused. What was that? She shook her head quickly, her voice returning to its practiced melody. Nothing, Mark. Nothing at all. But I saw it. The truth had cracked the dam of her composure, and soon it would break entirely. As Dad kissed her cheek and left for the backyard, I caught her gaze. She held it just long enough for me to see the fear beneath her fragile facade. He'll know, I mouthed, the words silent but sharp. She looked away, her shoulders trembling. The performance was almost over, and she knew it. The day stretched on, thick with unspoken tension. Dad spent the afternoon fixing the old fence in the yard, the steady rhythm of the hammer drowning out the echo of betrayal he didn't yet hear. I watched him from the window, each measured strike a testament to his strength, and a knife twisting deeper in my gut. Mom stayed inside, pretending to read a magazine, Her eyes glazed as she stared at the same page for an hour. Every time I moved, her gaze snapped to me, as if she feared I'd expose her right there, shatter her perfect world with a single word. I needed answers. I needed to see the man who had stolen my father's trust, the brother who had turned into a thief. That evening, I went to the gym where Ben trained. The air smelled of sweat and metal, the clank of weights punctuating my every step. Ben was there, his broad shoulders glistening with effort as he lifted. To anyone else, he looked like a hero, a soldier, a friend. But to me, he was the ghost of every lie Mom had whispered in the dark. "Hey," he said, flashing a smile when he saw me. "Your dad tells me you're thinking about joining up someday. You've got his heart, you know." My fists clenched at my sides. "And what about his trust?" I shot back, my voice steady but cold. He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "What's this about?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a hiss. "I know everything, Ben. The messages, the nights. My father's been fighting for this family his whole life. And you just took it." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "No." I cut in, my eyes blazing. "You don't understand. He thinks you're his brother. He thinks you die for him. But you're just another enemy he didn't see coming." For a moment, silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Then he looked away, shame darkening his face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered. But it was. And now the final betrayal was etched in every breath we took. The weight of that confrontation pressed down on me all night, twisting and turning in my chest like a living thing. I lay awake listening to the sound of Dad's steady breathing down the hall, the calm of a man who didn't yet know his whole world was built on shifting sand. I rose before dawn, the house still wrapped in silence. In the soft glow of the hallway light, I saw Mom's door cracked open, a thin slice of golden lamplight cutting through the darkness. I hesitated, my hand hovering at the edge of her world. She sat at her vanity, eyes puffy from crying, hands pressed to her mouth as if to stop the sobs from spilling out. She saw me and flinched, her lips trembling. "You're going to tell him," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was the simple truth she could no longer deny. "I have to," I said, my voice raw. "He deserves to know. He deserves to choose what to do with the truth." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. "I was so alone," she said softly. "I thought I could keep it buried, that it wouldn't matter when he came home. But it's all I see now." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The betrayal was too big for words, too deep for forgiveness. As she sobbed into her hands, I turned and walked away, my decision made. Down the hall, I paused at the threshold of Dad's room. I watched him sleeping, peaceful in the dim light, his face turned toward the medals on his nightstand. He trusted the wrong person once. He wouldn't again. I swore it to myself, and to him. Tomorrow, the truth would come crashing down, and I would be the one to make sure he saw it all. The morning air was thick with the scent of dew and old secrets. The sun streamed in through the curtains, painting the house in soft gold, but it felt like a lie, a cruel mask for the chaos simmering underneath. Lily sat at the piano, her small fingers gliding over the keys. She played the same song she'd sung at the parade, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the cracks in our family. "He'll never know," she sang softly, eyes closed, lost in the melody. I watched her from the doorway, my heart twisting. She was too young to understand the words she sang, but somehow her song had become a prophecy. Each note was a question, each pause a prayer. Mom stood in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dishes that didn't need washing. The clink of ceramic was a brittle counterpoint to Lily's melody. Her shoulders were tight, her every movement stiff and brittle. She was holding on barely. Dad came in from the yard, sweat on his brow and dirt on his hands. He paused by the piano, his eyes softening as he watched Lily. "That's my girl," he said, ruffling her hair. She smiled up at him, innocent and unaware that her song was a dagger in all our hearts. "Play it again, sweetheart," he said, sinking into the chair beside her. She obliged, her voice clear and bright as she sang. I saw Mom's fingers tremble around the dish she held, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Lily finished the last note and looked up at Dad, eyes wide with hope. "Do you like it?" she asked. He smiled, his face creasing with love. It's perfect, he said softly. Just perfect. The word hung in the air like a curse. As he turned to kiss Mom's cheek, she flinched. For a second, just a second, he saw it. The flicker of something dark in her eyes. He hesitated, but then shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. But I saw it too. The crack in her facade was growing wider. And soon, there would be no song sweet enough to hide it. That night, sleep was a stranger. My mind churned, every memory twisting in the dark. I knew I couldn't confront Dad without proof, not just of the affair, but of the depth of the betrayal. He needed more than words. He needed evidence. I slipped from my room in the dead of night, the house creaking under the weight of secrets. I moved like a ghost, my breath tight in my chest. Mom's purse lay on the kitchen table, a leather fortress guarding her lies. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. The zipper rasped like a whisper in the silent room. Inside, her phone was warm in my hand, the screen lighting up with a soft glow. I scrolled through the messages, each one a fresh wound. I miss you, Ben had written, counting the days till he's gone again. My vision blurred with rage. My father's best friend, the man he trusted with his life. Photos, dates, receipts from dinners I never knew they'd shared. My hand shook as I screenshotted everything, building a case that would shatter the world my father thought he knew. I found a photo that stole my breath, Mom and Ben at a cabin in the woods, her head on his shoulder, the same smile she wore for Dad now twisted into something secret and forbidden. I copied it all to a hidden folder on my own phone, my heart pounding like war drums. As I finished, I heard footsteps on the stairs, Dad, coming down for a glass of water. I shoved the phone back in her purse and slipped into the shadows, my breath caught in my throat. He passed through the kitchen, oblivious to the storm raging just beyond the door. He poured himself a drink, his face calm and untroubled. I watched him from the dark, my heart breaking for the man who still believed in love without shadows. The evidence was there. The truth was ready to be revealed. But first, I had to decide how to tell him. The next day dawned bright and cold, the air electric with tension. I could feel it in every breath, in every word left unspoken at the breakfast table. Dad was quiet, his eyes distant as he read the paper. Mom fussed over the coffee pot, her hands moving too fast, her smile too bright. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and when she did, it was like looking through a cracked window. I slipped away as they talked about nothing, weather, the garden, the grocery list. My mind was elsewhere. I needed to see Ben. I needed to look him in the eye and make him feel the weight of the betrayal he'd helped create. I found him at the hardware store, loading lumber into the back of his truck. He saw me and smiled, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Hey there," he said, too casual, too smooth. I walked up slowly, each step deliberate, my fists clenched at my sides. "We need to talk," I said, my voice like ice. He hesitated, his hands pausing on the wood. "About what?" "You know what," I said. My words were low, calm, but they cut like knives. "My father, my mother, and you." He shifted, his jaw tightening. "It's complicated," he said finally. "You wouldn't understand, try me," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "Because all I see is a man who took everything my father held sacred and spat on it." For a moment, he looked like he might fight back. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I never meant to hurt him," he said. "It just happened. She was lonely. I was there." My vision went red. "You were his brother." I spat. "You were supposed to protect him, not steal from him." He reached out, but I stepped back, my eyes burning. "I'm done listening to your excuses," I said. "I have everything I need, and I'm going to show him. All of it." He paled, his hand falling to his side. "Don't," he whispered. "You'll destroy him." I turned away, my voice flat and final. "You already did." And as I walked away, the cold wind whipped around me, a fitting witness to the war I was about to unleash. The sun dipped low, turning the sky to molten gold as I slipped into the attic. Dust motes swirled in the thin light streaming through the small window. The old floorboards groaned under my feet, the air thick with the scent of cedar and forgotten memories. I moved carefully, weaving through stacks of boxes, relics of a life built on duty and trust. My father's uniform from his first deployment, pressed and pristine in a garment bag. A box of letters tied with a frayed ribbon, his words to Mom during those long months overseas. But it was the heavy wooden chest at the far end of the attic that drew me in. The lock clicked open with a soft snap, revealing medals laid out in velvet-lined rows. Each one was a testament to the man he was: brave, loyal, unbreakable. My fingers traced the cold metal of a silver star, the weight of it echoing in my chest. I imagined my father standing tall on the battlefield, the same unwavering resolve in his eyes that he wore at the breakfast table. Next to the medals lay a photo album. I opened it carefully, the pages crackling as I turned them. Each photo was a moment frozen in time. Dad in his dress blues, his arm around Mom's waist, his eyes bright with pride. My mother's smile was radiant, her head resting on his shoulder, but now every smile was a ghost. I found a photo of him and Ben, arms slung over each other's shoulders, laughter in their eyes. Brothers. Warriors. And now, the very man who had sworn to have his back had stabbed him instead. My heart clenched. I knew then that this wasn't just about my mother's betrayal. It was about everything Dad had fought to protect. His honor. His trust. The family he thought he'd built on unshakable ground. I closed the chest gently, my mind already racing. These medals, these memories, they were more than just metal and paper. They were the foundation of who he was, and I would not let them be stained by a lie. That night, the house felt like a cathedral of silence, each corner echoing with the weight of what was coming. Lily sat on the old piano bench, her fingers moving slowly over the keys. Her song was softer this time, each note a fragile promise in the dark. I stood in the doorway, watching her. She was too young to understand the truth I was about to reveal, but her song gave me strength. The melody carried the ache in my chest, the fear, the anger, the determination. Mom passed by the doorway, pausing as she saw Lily playing. Her eyes softened, a glimmer of the woman she used to be shining through the cracks. But as her gaze drifted to me, that softness vanished, replaced by the knowledge that soon everything would be laid bare. Lily, she said gently, play something happier, sweetheart. Something bright. Lily looked up at her, confusion in her wide eyes. This is Daddy's favorite song, she said softly. Mom's smile wavered. I know, darling. I know. She walked away then, her shoulders slumped, her steps heavy on the stairs. I crossed the room and sat beside Lily, my hand resting on the polished wood. Do you know why Dad loves this song? I asked quietly. She shook her head, her eyes bright with curiosity. Because it's about coming home, I said. About finding your way back to the people you love, no matter how far you've gone. She nodded, her small hands resuming their gentle dance across the keys. Her voice rose, pure and clear. He'll never know. I closed my eyes, letting the notes wash over me. Each one was a vow, a promise that even if the truth broke us, it would also set us free. When the song ended, she looked at me, her face solemn. Why are you sad, brother? She asked softly. I took a breath, the lie catching in my throat. Because sometimes love isn't enough, I said. Sometimes you have to fight for the truth. And tomorrow I would. No more shadows. No more secrets. The next morning dawned with a cold, sharp light that cut through the curtains and spilled across the room. I woke early, my heart pounding with the weight of what I had to do. Downstairs, Mom was already moving through the kitchen, her movements careful and deliberate. She didn't look at me as I entered, but I could see the tension in the tight line of her shoulders. She knew today would change everything. Dad was out in the yard, working on the fence again, the steady rhythm of hammer and nail echoing like a heartbeat. He looked so sure, so grounded in the life he thought he had. My chest ached at the thought of what I was about to tear open. I walked outside, the morning air crisp and biting. He straightened as he saw me, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Could use an extra pair of hands, he said, holding out a nail. I took it, my fingers brushing against the calloused strength of his. Dad, I said, my voice tight, Can we talk? He paused, the hammer lowering slowly. Of course, he said, his brow creasing with concern. What's on your mind? I took a breath, the words trembling on my lips. It's about Mom. And Ben. His eyes darkened, the lines on his face deepening. What about them? He asked, his voice low, steady, the calm before the storm. I pulled out my phone, the evidence I gathered laid bare in the cold light of day. I need you to see this, I said. You need to see the truth. He took the phone, his hands steady even as his eyes began to flicker with something I'd never seen before: doubt. Betrayal. The silence stretched between us as he scrolled, the images and messages like bullets tearing through the armor he'd worn for so long. When he finally looked up at me, his face was pale, his jaw clenched. Is this real? He asked quietly, his voice hoarse. I nodded, my throat tight. Every word. Every moment. He closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. And in that moment, I knew the battle had begun. The silent witness had spoken, and there would be no going back. Dad sat on the porch, the phone still in his hand. His knuckles were white against the metal frame, and his eyes were locked on the horizon. But I could tell he wasn't really seeing the autumn leaves drifting down from the old oak tree. He was seeing every lie, every stolen moment. I sat beside him in the silence that followed, the weight of the truth hanging heavy between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel the rage and heartbreak coiling in his chest, see the way his jaw tightened as he forced back the storm inside. Finally, he let out a shuddering breath. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like, he said softly, his voice rough as gravel. On the battlefield, you expect it, you prepare for it. But at home, from the woman you built your life around. His words trailed off, swallowed by the cold morning air. I swallowed, my throat raw. I'm so sorry, Dad, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't want you to find out like this, but you had to know. He turned to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. You did the right thing, he said quietly. The truth is the only thing that matters now. He rose then, his movements slow but deliberate, like a man bracing for war. He walked to the flagpole by the garden, the stars and stripes flapping gently in the breeze. He reached out, tracing the edge of the flag with a trembling hand. I fought for this country, he said, his voice steady. For honor, for loyalty. And I won't let those words mean nothing here. I watched him, his broad shoulders straightening, the soldier in him rising from the ashes of heartbreak. In that moment, I saw not just my father, but the warrior he had always been. He turned back to me, his eyes hard with resolve. She took my trust, he said, his voice like steel. But she won't take my dignity. And I knew then, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. That night, the air felt thick and electric, every breath laced with the knowledge of what was to come. Mom moved through the house like a ghost, her steps careful, her eyes darting to the shadows as if she could feel the weight of the truth pressing down. I found her in the living room, staring blankly at the family portraits that lined the mantel. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, and I could see the tremor in her shoulders as she turned to me. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. You're tearing this family apart. I stepped closer, my own voice calm and cold. I'm not the one who did that, I said, each word deliberate. You and Ben did. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I made a mistake, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant for it to go so far. I shook my head, anger and sadness warring in my chest. You lied to all of us, I said. You let him think he had a brother, someone who would die for him. And you let me believe in a mother who would never betray him. She sank into the armchair, her face buried in her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I was lonely. I thought he'd moved on without me, out there in the world, and I was weak. I knelt in front of her, my voice trembling but resolute. You can't erase what you've done, I said. But you can't hide from it anymore, either. Dad deserves to know the whole truth, not just pieces of it. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and raw. For a moment, I saw the mother I remembered, the woman who had kissed scraped knees and sung lullabies. But that woman was buried under too many lies to ever come back. I'll tell him, she whispered finally, her shoulders shaking. I'll tell him everything. I nodded, standing. Good, I said softly. Because he deserves the truth, even if it destroys us all. The next day was bright and cold, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made the world feel sharper, more alive. But inside our house, everything felt heavy, the air tight with anticipation. Dad spent the morning in the garage, the rhythmic clank of his tools a steady beat against the silence. He was a soldier again, methodical, focused, every movement deliberate. I could see it in his eyes. He was no longer just a man betrayed. He was a man preparing for battle. Mom stayed in the kitchen, her face pale, her hands shaking as she washed the same cup over and over. She was lost in her own mind, her thoughts a storm of guilt and fear. I moved between them like a shadow, the weight of the coming confrontation pressing on my chest. Each breath felt like a countdown. When Dad finally stepped back into the house, his eyes were clear and hard. He looked at me, then at Mom, his voice low but steady. We're going to end this today, he said. No more lies. She nodded, her lips trembling. I'll tell you everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat in the living room, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds in harsh, golden stripes. Mom took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap as she began to speak. She told him everything, every meeting, every lie, every moment of weakness she had shared with Ben. Her words fell like stones, each one landing heavy in the room. Dad listened in silence, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those clear, steady eyes, never wavered. When she finished, the room went quiet. The only sound was the soft ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Dad rose slowly, his voice calm and resolute. Thank you for telling me, he said. But now, it's my turn. He turned to me, a flicker of pain and pride in his gaze. Son, he said, get everything ready. I want them both to know exactly what they've done and what they've lost. I nodded, my resolve hardening. The plan was in motion now, and there was no turning back. The living room was thick with tension, the air charged like the moments before a storm. Dad stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the horizon. He was a statue of calm determination, but I could see the pulse hammering at his throat, the tight set of his jaw. Mom sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her own shame. She hadn't tried to deny it. There were no more lies left to hide behind. I moved around the room quietly, gathering the pieces of the plan Dad and I had laid out. The messages, the photos, the recordings, every scrap of proof that would expose the truth for everyone to see. My hands trembled as I placed them in the folder, but my mind was clear. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Dad turned to me, his voice low and even. We'll do it tonight, he said. The company banquet. Everyone who matters will be there. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone? He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw the soldier he had always been, the man who would stand tall in the face of any enemy. The truth shouldn't be whispered in the dark, he said. It should be shouted in the light. Mom's breath caught at his words, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't argue. There was no defense left for her to give. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the walls in hues of blood and fire, I felt the final pieces of the plan click into place. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And by the end of the night, there would be no secrets left. The banquet hall was a sea of soft golden light and murmured laughter, the clink of glasses and the hum of polite conversation filling the air. Dad stood tall in his dress uniform, the medals on his chest catching the glow of the chandeliers. He looked every inch the hero, the soldier, the man who had always been the foundation of this family. I watched him from across the room, my stomach a knot of nerves and determination. Mom hovered nearby, her eyes darting between Dad and the door, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows, but this was the noose she had tied herself. Lily clung to my hand, her small fingers warm and trusting. She didn't understand the weight of what was coming, but somehow she sensed it, her eyes wide and solemn as she looked up at me. "Is Daddy mad?" she whispered. I knelt down, brushing a stray curl from her face. "No, Lily," I said softly. "Daddy's just strong. And tonight, he needs to show everyone how strong he really is." She nodded, her eyes serious. "Will we be okay?" I hugged her close, my own voice trembling. "We will," I promised. "We'll be okay because the truth makes us strong, too." As the speeches began and the laughter swelled around us, I felt the seconds ticking down. Dad moved through the crowd with a quiet dignity, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, but his eyes were cold, focused on the mission ahead. I caught Mom's gaze across the room. She tried to smile, but it faltered, her face pale. She knew what was coming. She knew there was no way out. The music rose, a soft piano melody that echoed the song Lily had sung at the parade. My chest tightened at the memory, at the echo of that innocent voice carrying the weight of our family's lies. And as the final note lingered in the air, Dad raised his glass, his voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his eyes sweeping the room. "But before we go any further, there's something I need to share." The room went still, the laughter dying like a candle snuffed out. In that silence, I felt the world hold its breath. The storm had come, and we were ready to face it. Dad stood at the head of the room, his glass raised, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. His eyes found Mom across the room, and for a single breath, the air between them seemed to crackle. "I want to thank you all," he said slowly, his tone warm but threaded with steel. "For your friendship, for standing by me through every battle, overseas and at home." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of friends and colleagues. "And tonight," he continued, lowering his glass slightly, "I want to share a different kind of truth. One that doesn't wear a uniform, but one that matters just as much." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the folder we had prepared together. My heart pounded in my chest as he laid it gently on the table in front of him. "Trust," he said softly, "is the foundation of everything we hold dear. And when that trust is broken, it shatters more than just hearts." Mom's face had gone white, her lips parting in a silent gasp. She took a step forward, but stopped herself, her hands trembling at her sides. Dad flipped open the folder, revealing the photos, the messages, every piece of the betrayal that had torn our family apart. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, gasps and shocked whispers. He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. "Linda," he said quietly, his voice breaking for the first time, "I gave you everything I had. My love, my trust, my life. And you gave it away like it meant nothing." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her hands clenching into fists. Ben, standing near the bar, took a step back, his face pale and stricken. He looked like a man cornered, no place left to hide. Dad turned to the room, his voice stronger now. "I want you all to see this. To know that the man you see standing here tonight, the medals on his chest, the strength in his back, that man will not be broken by lies." He raised his glass once more, his hand steady. "To truth," he said, "and to the courage it takes to face it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. And in that silence, I saw my father, not just a soldier, but a man who had reclaimed his honor, his dignity, and his place in the world. The truth had been spoken, and now there was no turning back. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mom's face was a mask of disbelief and devastation, her lips parting soundlessly as the evidence lay exposed before her. Her hands shook as she reached for the photos, the texts, each one a piece of her carefully crafted lie crumbling beneath her fingers. The room had fallen into a heavy silence, the kind that follows a thunderclap. Friends who had known us for years exchanged glances, their polite smiles vanishing under the weight of what they were seeing. Even the music had died, the soft piano fading into the distance like an echo of our family's past. I can explain," Mom stammered, her voice breaking like glass. "Mark, it wasn't what you think." Dad's face was carved from stone, his eyes cold and clear. "Don't," he said, his voice quiet but carrying more finality than any shout. "You've already said enough." She reached for him, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his uniform. But he stepped back, his jaw clenched. "You lied to me," he said softly. "To our children. To yourself." Her shoulders slumped, her sobs coming ragged and uneven. "I was lost," she cried, tears streaking her mascara. "You were gone for so long. And Ben?" He was there. Dad's gaze flicked to Ben, standing in the corner, his face pale and his mouth a tight line. "And you?" Dad said, his voice low and steady. "You were supposed to be my brother, my friend." Ben opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked down at the floor, shame written across his features like a scar. The room was suffocating with the weight of it all, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the finality. But in that moment, I saw something else in Dad's eyes, a quiet strength, a resolve that went deeper than any uniform or medal. Mom fell to her knees, her sobs echoing in the silent hall. But there were no more lies to save her now. And for the first time, I saw the truth for what it really was, not just an end, but the beginning of something new. The quiet that followed was thick and heavy, like the hush before a storm breaks. Dad stood tall, the folder of evidence closed, but its impact reverberating through every stunned face in the room. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no taking it back. Mom knelt on the polished floor, her hands pressed to her face as her sobs racked her slender frame. Each cry was a confession, each breath a shuddering apology. But no apology could mend what she'd broken. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. I thought I could control it, that it wouldn't matter once you came home." Dad looked down at her, his eyes filled with a kind of quiet sorrow that cut deeper than any scream. "You didn't just hurt me," he said, his voice even but cold. "You took the trust one built my life on, and you burned it to ashes." She reached out, fingers brushing the hem of his jacket. "Please, Mark. I still love you." "I was weak, but it's always been you." He stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what love is," he said, each word measured and deliberate. "Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't lie." Ben shifted uneasily, his eyes darting to the exit as if he could outrun the shame that bound him. But Dad's gaze found him too. "And you," he said, his tone hardening. "You were supposed to have my back. In every fight, every storm. And instead, you became the storm." Ben opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. His shoulders slumped, his head bowing in silent admission. The guest stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. But I felt a quiet pride swell in my chest. My father, the man who had weathered every battle, was still standing, unbroken. He turned to the crowd, his voice calm and sure. "This is the truth," he said. "This is what betrayal looks like. And I will not let it define me or my family." The silence that followed was a kind of absolution, a cleansing of the lies that had stained us for too long. And in that moment, I knew we were no longer captives of the past. The ride home from the banquet was a silent procession, the car filled with the echoes of everything that had been said and done. Mom sat in the back seat, her head bowed, her face hidden behind a curtain of hair. Dad's hands gripped the steering wheel, the muscles in his jaw working as he stared straight ahead. I sat beside Lily, her small hand gripping mine tightly. She didn't say a word, her wide eyes reflecting the weight of the night. I squeezed her fingers gently, a promise that we'd find our way through this, somehow. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad didn't move at first. He sat there, the engine ticking softly, his eyes locked on the darkened windows of the house. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Take Lily inside," he said. "I need to speak with your mother." I nodded, guiding Lily up the steps and through the front door. She turned back once, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She just clung to me, her small frame trembling. Inside, I watched through the window as Dad and Mom stood in the driveway, their silhouettes stark against the porch light. Her hands were outstretched, pleading, but he didn't move. His head was bowed, his shoulders broad and unyielding. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the finality in the set of his jaw, the way she sagged under the weight of his silence. And then, slowly, she turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched, her head down. She didn't come back inside that night. Dad stepped through the door a moment later, his face pale but resolute. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I had always known, the father who had taught me strength and honor. But I also saw the cracks the night had left behind. "It's done," he said quietly. "She's leaving in the morning." I nodded, my chest tight with 1,000 emotions I couldn't name. "What about us?" I asked softly. He looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, her breathing slow and steady. "We'll be okay," he said. "We'll rebuild, brick by brick, truth by truth." And in that promise, I saw the first light of something new, the first fragile glow of a future built on truth. Morning light filtered through the curtains in thin, pale ribbons, painting the living room in a hush of gold. The air was heavy with the echoes of the night before. The house felt hollow, every creak of the floorboards a ghost of laughter that no longer belonged to this place. Mom's room was empty. Her suitcase, packed in a quiet rush, sat by the door like a final confession. She moved silently through the house, her footsteps soft, careful. When she saw me in the hallway, her eyes met mine, red-rimmed, hollow. For a second, she looked like she might speak. But then she turned away, her lips pressed into a line that held back every apology, every plea. Dad stood at the kitchen window, a mug of black coffee cradled in his hands. The steam rose in delicate spirals, fading before they reached his face. His shoulders were straight, but the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, etched by the weight of betrayal and a night without sleep. "She's leaving," he said quietly, his voice steady but stripped of warmth. "She'll stay with her sister for a while. Until we figure out what's next." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. Are you okay, Dad?" He didn't answer at first, just stared out the window at the autumn leaves dancing across the lawn. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice so low I almost missed it. "But I know this, we're still a family. And I'm not letting this break us." Lily sat at the piano, her small hands resting on the keys, the melody she'd once played echoing in the silence. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, as if she could feel the shift in the house. "Where's Mommy going?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. She's taking some time," I said carefully, my voice catching. "But Daddy's here. I'm here. And we're going to be okay." The final notes of her song drifted into the quiet. And in that silence, we took the first steps forward. The next morning brought a chill that clung to the air, a sharp edge of autumn that matched the unease twisting in my gut. Dad was in the study. The door closed as he made quiet phone calls, setting in motion the practical steps of moving on. Lawyers, bank accounts, all the details of dismantling a life built on trust. I paced the living room, the weight of something else gnawing at the edge of my thoughts. The night before, as I'd gathered the evidence, I'd found something that didn't fit, a series of payments to a private clinic hidden in Mom's old emails. A single word in the subject lines that made my blood run cold: paternity. I'd thought it was just another of her secrets, something she'd hidden from Dad. But now, the doubt wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't rest until I knew. I slipped into Dad's study, my heart pounding. He looked up from his paperwork, his eyes tired but focused. "What is it, son?" he asked. I took a breath, my hands cold. "Dad, I need to show you something. Something I found." I pulled up the emails, my voice trembling. I think there's more." "About Lily." His brow furrowed, his gaze sharpening. "More? What do you mean?" I swallowed hard. "There's a test. A paternity test. It's dated from when you were overseas." My voice cracked. I think Lily might not be yours." The words hung between us, heavy and devastating. Dad's face went pale, his eyes closing as he drew in a slow breath. "Are you sure?" he whispered. I nodded, my hands shaking. "I haven't opened it yet. I thought you should be the one to see it." He reached for the file with steady hands, but I could see the tremor in his fingers. As he read, the color drained from his face. When he looked up at me, His eyes were filled with a hurt deeper than any wound I'd ever seen. "She's still my daughter," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "No matter what this paper says." He closed the file and set it aside, his shoulders squared. "She's mine because I chose her. And I'll choose her again. Always." And in that moment, I understood what real strength looked like. The truth had cracked open something deeper than even I'd imagined. That night, Dad and I sat at the kitchen table, the old clock ticking steadily above us. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows like a warning. "She's still my little girl," Dad said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet house. "Blood doesn't change that. I raised her. I taught her to ride a bike, to sing her favorite song. She's mine in every way that matters." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, Dad. I didn't want to keep it from you." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering mine. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "The truth, it's all we have now." A quiet moment passed between us, filled with unspoken grief and something stronger, resolve. The door creaked open and Mom stepped inside, her face pale and drawn. She hesitated in the doorway, her eyes flicking to the folder still lying on the table. "I see you found it," she said, her voice trembling. Dad's gaze was steady as he met her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. Tears welled in her eyes. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what it would do to us, to you." He stood slowly, the weight of his decision in every line of his face. "You were afraid of losing your comfort," he said, his tone flat. "You weren't afraid of losing us. You lost us the moment you chose to lie." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "Mark, please. She's your daughter in every way that counts." He turned away from her, his shoulders straight. "I know that," he said softly. "And that's why I'll fight for her, but I won't fight for you." She reached out, but he stepped back, his face a mask of quiet finality. "Go," he said. "We're done here." And with those simple words, the last thread that held us all together finally snapped. The house was quiet in the aftermath of Mom's departure, a hush that felt both suffocating and strangely peaceful. I woke early to the soft sound of piano keys drifting through the hallway, a melody I knew by heart, one that carried a weight I hadn't fully understood until now. Lily sat at the piano, her small back straight, her fingers moving with careful precision over the keys. Her voice rose in a soft, wavering song, the same song she'd sung at the parade, each word ringing out like a question. "He'll never know," she sang, her voice as fragile as glass. I stood in the doorway, watching her. The music wrapped around me, and for a moment, it was like the house was holding its breath, like the walls themselves were listening. She looked up when she saw me, her wide eyes searching mine. "Why does it feel different now?" she asked quietly, her hands pausing on the keys. I walked over and knelt beside her, my hand resting on the worn wood of the piano. "Because now we know the truth," I said softly. "And sometimes, the truth can change everything, even a song." She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Daddy's sad," she said, her voice catching. "He tries to smile, but I see it. He's different now." My chest tightened. "He's still your daddy, Lily," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "And he loves you more than anything in the world. That hasn't changed." She looked back at the keys, her small fingers touching them gently. "Will he still want to hear me play?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I reached over, brushing her hair back from her face. "He'll always want to hear you play," I said. "Your music, it's hope. And right now, that's what we all need." She smiled then, a soft, sad smile. And when she started to play again, the melody wasn't just a song anymore, it was a promise. A vow that even in the ashes of our family, something beautiful could still grow. The following days moved like a slow, measured march. Dad rose early each morning, his footsteps steady on the old wooden stairs. There was a quiet determination in the way he moved, every gesture deliberate, every breath a silent act of defiance against the chaos we'd been left in. I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he worked in the backyard, fixing the fence that had fallen into disrepair during the weeks of tension. Each swing of the hammer was precise, the rhythmic thud of wood on metal a heartbeat in the cold morning air. When he paused to wipe sweat from his brow, I stepped out to join him. The chill bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I needed to be there, to feel the weight of every moment alongside him. "Dad," I said softly, my voice catching in the early light. "How do you keep going? After everything." He set the hammer down, his breath misting in the cold. "Son," he said, his voice low and resolute, "being a soldier isn't just about fighting wars. It's about standing your ground when the world tries to knock you down." He met my gaze, his eyes clear and unwavering. "It's about knowing who you are and never letting anyone take that away from you." I swallowed, the knot in my throat tightening. "I see that now," I said. "I see how strong you are." He smiled then, just a small, tired smile. "Strength isn't about never falling," he said quietly. "It's about getting back up. Again and again." He looked out at the yard, the fence slowly taking shape under his careful hands. "This house, this family, it's worth fighting for." I nodded, the weight of his words settling deep in my chest. In that moment, I saw not just the man who had raised me, but the soldier who would never surrender, not to war, not to betrayal, not to the ghosts that still lingered in the shadows. And as he picked up the hammer once more, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The day Ben came back was cold and sharp, the sky bruised with heavy clouds that threatened rain. I was in the kitchen when the knock sounded at the door, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed through the house like a challenge. Dad answered, his broad frame filling the doorway as he faced the man who had once been his brother. Ben stood there, his face pale, his eyes shadowed. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched under the weight of everything he'd done. "Mark," he said softly, his voice rough with shame. "I needed to see you." Dad didn't move, his expression carved from stone. "You've seen enough," he said coldly. "What could you possibly have left to say?" Ben swallowed, his gaze flicking to the ground. "I know I don't deserve to ask for anything," he said, "but I needed to tell you. I never meant for it to happen. I didn't plan to take what was yours." Dad's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "You didn't just take her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You took my trust, my family." Ben's shoulders slumped, his breath catching. "I know," he said. "I live with it every day, and I'll carry it for the rest of my life." He looked up then, his eyes meeting Dad's. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed to say I'm sorry." The words hung in the cold air, brittle as the frost clinging to the window panes. Dad was silent for a long moment, his eyes steady and unblinking. "Sorry," he said finally, his voice flat. "Sorry doesn't fix what's been broken." Ben nodded slowly, his shoulders drooping as he turned to leave. He hesitated at the threshold, his voice a whisper. "Take care of Lily," he said. "She deserves better than the lies we gave her." Dad didn't answer, didn't move. He just watched as Ben walked away, the doors swinging shut behind him with a quiet finality that felt like the end of an era. The days that followed were quiet, the house settling into a new rhythm in the absence of everything that had once defined it. There were no more secrets in the walls, no more whispered lies. Only the slow, steady work of rebuilding what had been broken. Dad spent his days in the yard, the garden beds neat and ready for winter. He worked with a calm focus that spoke of healing, of a man who had found his footing again after the earth had been ripped out from under him. Inside, I took on the small repairs, fixing squeaky hinges, tightening loose boards, each act a promise that this house would stand strong again. I found comfort in the work, in the sense of purpose that came from putting the pieces back together. Lily filled the house with her music, her soft songs echoing through the halls like a balm on old wounds. Sometimes I'd find her at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, her face calm and focused. She didn't ask about Mom anymore, and I didn't push. We let her find her own way through the silence, one note at a time. One evening, as the sun slipped below the trees, Dad and I stood in the doorway, the scent of fresh earth and autumn leaves filling the air. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I asked quietly, my voice steady but laced with hope. He looked at me, his eyes warm in the fading light. "Yes," he said. "We've lost a lot, but we're still here. And as long as we have that, we'll be okay." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer an open wound. It was a scar, a reminder of what we'd survived. And as the first stars blinked to life above us, I knew we were ready to face whatever came next, together and unafraid. The days grew shorter, the autumn light slanting golden through the old windows. In the quiet spaces of the house, Lily's voice became the heartbeat of our healing. Each evening, she would sit at the piano, her small hands coaxing the keys into a song that was part lullaby, part prayer. One evening, I found her there as the sun slipped below the trees, the last light of day bathing her in a soft glow. Her face was serene, her eyes closed as her fingers danced across the keys. The melody was slow and deliberate, each note a question and an answer all at once. Dad stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the worn floorboards. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just listened, his face soft in the dim light. I watched him as he watched her, the way his eyes glistened with something that was part pride, part sorrow. When she finished, Lily looked up at us, her small voice breaking the silence. "Did you like it, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. Dad walked over slowly, his boots soft against the old rug. He knelt beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder. "I loved it," he said quietly, his voice thick. "You know, your music has always been the light in this house." She smiled shyly, her fingers still resting on the keys. "Will you sing with me next time?" she asked, tilting her head. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'd like that, Lily," he said. "I'd like that very much." I watched them, my heart aching with the fragile beauty of the moment. The betrayal still lived in the walls, a shadow that would never fully disappear. But in Lily's music, I saw the promise of something more, the promise of a family that refused to be broken. And as Dad stood and kissed the top of her head, I realized that even in the aftermath of betrayal, there was still room for hope. Winter crept closer with each passing day, the first whispers of frost tracing the edges of the windows. The parade that had once been the backdrop of our lives now felt like a distant memory, a bright, noisy dream from another time. One morning, as I watched Dad tying his boots by the back door, I realized how different he looked now. There was still a soldier's strength in the set of his shoulders, but there was something softer too, a quiet resolve that didn't need to be shouted to be real. "Going for a walk?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He nodded, his eyes distant. "I need to clear my head," he said. "I've been thinking about what comes next." I hesitated, then followed him outside. The world was hushed under a soft gray sky, the trees stripped bare but standing tall. We walked down the familiar street, past the old houses that had seen our laughter and our tears. As we passed the square where the parade had once marched in Dad's honor, he paused. He looked at the empty space, his breath misting in the cold air. "That day, it feels like a lifetime ago," he said quietly. "It does," I agreed, my voice gentle. "But it doesn't have to be the only thing we remember." He turned to me then, his eyes steady. "No," he said, "it doesn't." He took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening. "I want to build something new. Not a parade for others to see, but a life that's real, honest, even if it's quiet." I nodded, understanding him more than ever. The truth had broken us once, but it had also given us the chance to start again. And in the quiet of that empty square, I saw the first outlines of what that life could be. We turned back toward home, our footsteps soft against the cold pavement. There was no music, no cheers, just the simple, quiet beat of moving forward together. The day Mom returned to pack her things was cold and still, the sky a pale canvas above the brittle trees. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes downcast, her steps careful and silent. She didn't linger in any room, didn't pause to remember the life we'd shared here. I watched from the doorway as she folded clothes into a small suitcase, each piece a fragment of a life she was leaving behind. The air felt heavy, filled with words we'd never say. Dad stood at the threshold, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't move to help or to stop her. He just watched, his silence saying everything she needed to hear. She paused once, her hands trembling over a faded family photo. The four of us on a summer day, laughter frozen in the bright sun. Her shoulders shook, a single sob escaping her lips before she carefully set the picture back on the shelf. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally, her voice raw. "For everything." Dad's jaw tightened. "I know," he said simply. "But that doesn't change what's been done." She nodded, tears streaking down her face as she closed the suitcase and lifted it in her trembling hands. "Take care of Lily," she said, her voice breaking. "She deserves better than I gave her." "She'll have it," Dad said quietly, his voice steady as stone. She hesitated at the door, her eyes meeting his one last time. There was no forgiveness in that look, only the quiet acceptance of a chapter closed. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft finality that echoed through the house. Dad stood there for a long moment, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. He turned to me, his eyes clear. "It's done," he said. And in the stillness that followed, I realized that we weren't just saying goodbye to her, we were saying goodbye to everything we'd been. And in that farewell, we found the first fragile threads of something new. The house felt different in the days after Mom left, like a breath had finally been exhaled after holding it for far too long. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, filled with the gentle rhythms of a family rediscovering itself. Dad spent more time in the garden, the earth cold but alive beneath his hands. He moved with quiet purpose, planting bulbs that would sleep through winter and bloom in spring, a promise of new beginnings buried deep in the soil. Inside, the piano's soft melodies wrapped around us each night, Lily's small hands finding hope in the keys. Her songs were different now, still tender, but stronger. Like she understood that music wasn't just something pretty. It was a way to tell the truth when words fell short. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold behind the trees, Dad called us into the living room. He stood by the fireplace, his face calm, the lines around his eyes softened by something close to peace. "Come here, both of you," he said, his voice low and sure. Lily ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. I stood beside them, my heart swelling with everything we'd been through and everything still to come. He looked at us, his eyes bright. "I know this hasn't been easy," he said. "I know it hurt. But look at us, we're still here, still standing." He smiled, just a little. "That's what matters. Not the lies, not the betrayal, just us." He turned to Lily, brushing a hand over her hair. "Your music gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it," he said softly. "Promise me you'll never stop playing. Never stop believing that even in the darkest places, there's always a song waiting to be heard." She nodded, her smile small but fierce. "I promise, Daddy," she said. And in that moment, I saw it, the truth he'd been trying to teach us all along. That family wasn't about perfection. It was about the choice to keep showing up, no matter how many times you'd been knocked down. We sat together as the last light of day faded, our arms around each other. And in the quiet, I asked the question that had been burning in my heart. What would you have done if you never found out the truth? Dad looked at me, his gaze steady. "I would have lived a lie," he said. "And that's something I could never do. Not then. Not now." He reached for Lily's hand, his fingers warm and sure. "We're going to be okay," he said, "because we've built this on truth. And truth is stronger than any lie." As the fire crackled softly, the three of us sat there in the glow of something stronger than the past. A promise. A family, forged in the hardest of truths and unbreakable because of it. And now, I want to hear from you. What would you do if the truth was staring you in the face? Would you bury it or face it, no matter the cost? Let me know in the comments below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. If this story spoke to your heart, tap that like button and subscribe so you never miss a single tale of love, betrayal, and the quiet strength of starting over. Let's build a community where the truth and your voice always have a place. See you in the next story.